Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. This time I'm going to need your help. I'm going to need your help trying to track down this forever friend, because as with several other of my forever friends, his name is not that unusual. So Google will not make it easy for me. But if you happen to know this young man, that would be great if you could help find him for me. His name is Jeff Hixson. Jeff Hixson, Hixson. And Jeff and I were never especially close friends. I never went to hang out with Jeff at his house or had him come to my house. I never went to the movies with Jeff. I never called Jeff just to talk on the phone. I never wrote Jeff. But we were in some similar social circles, and whenever those social circles would cause our paths to cross, I was always grateful. Jeff was a fairly quiet, easygoing fellow. He was not awkward, and yet he was also not a super athlete. He wasn't immensely popular, but he wasn't an outcast either. He was just really steady and fun and friendly. And many of the things, when I look back and think about Jeff Hixson, many of the things that I appreciate about him are really character issues. He was not a outspoken evangelist trying to drag all his friends into the kingdom of God. But he had a quiet dignity about him and, again, a sense of character. One of the things that stuck out to me, Jeff and I played soccer together. That's another place our paths crossed. One of the places, though, that I saw that character is he would say, or like when he would sign your yearbook, he would put Godspeed. Godspeed. And it just sounds so dignified, and it is a reminder that the well wishes that we wish upon our friends really need to be a wish for God's blessing on someone. And so I just appreciated that about him. Another thing I appreciated about him very much was his relationship and friendship with his younger brother. His younger brother was a little bit more outgoing and a little bit more, what's the word for it? Well, he's younger, so I'm going to just say, we'll call it silly. He was kind of silly. Not in an annoying way, but he was silly. And if you were one who was prone to being very image conscious, you might not appreciate your younger brother hanging out with your older friends being silly. But Jeff not only didn't turn his back on his younger brother, didn't act embarrassed by his younger brother, but he very clearly and obviously enjoyed his younger brother. Now, again, I don't know anything about their home life, but I'm going to have to guess it was probably a very stable home situation for both of them, because, again, they were just, both of them, well-behaved, again, not uptight, not looking down their noses at anybody, but just well-behaved. They were the kind of people who would say yes, sir, and no, sir, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. And when you would hear it, you wouldn't think, oh, please. You would think, oh, please make me like that. I want to be that honoring to my elders. So I enjoyed Jeff immensely. Jeff, by the way, is the one who actually started this wearing your shirt untucked thing. He started it back in the 70s. That's one other thing I remember about it. When everybody was wearing their shirts tucked in, he was not. He had them untucked. But Jeff, again, character, kindness, gentleness, a good sense of humor without being silly like his younger brother. But his younger brother was always there when you needed a little bit of silliness. Man, it's because we weren't as close as we might have been. It would be very easy for me to overlook the ways that he blessed my life, the ways that God used him in my life. And that's why this is such a healthy exercise for me, and I would encourage it as a healthy exercise for you. First, please help me out. If you know Jeff Hixson, he's from Stallstown, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, near Ligonier. He went to Ligonier High School. He played soccer, and I don't know where he went after that. But if you can find him, hook him up with this podcast and let him know that his old friend Craig Sproul remembers him and thanks God for him and respects him and admires him and enjoys his younger brother as well. As for you, once again, let me encourage you first. Do this. Find a way to do this. It doesn't have to be an audio recording, though it could be. These things are not that hard to make. It could be a letter. It could be an email. Contact an old friend and let them know, hey, this is what I remember about you. This is what I enjoyed. I look at how God brought you into my life, and it was just a blessing. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be earth-shaking. Just let them know. And then I would ask you again to let me know how that goes. I would love to get a report on your stories for if you were reaching out to some of your forever friends and thanking them and thanking God for them. For today's Curating Your Movie Library segment, I'm sadly not with my precious wife, who is not able to be with me right now. So I thought I'd take the occasion, as is my wont when she's not able to be here, to provide a top 5 list. And maybe that's a little too ordered for what I have in mind, because what I wanted to do today is talk to you about not just the value of older movies, but especially the value of older actors. Lisa and I have been watching a few older films lately, and I sort of rediscovered one of my favorite actors. That actor is Cary Grant. I don't know how anyone could not enjoy Cary Grant, and he does have a great range that he can play. And some of his best work is comedy, some of his best work is suspense. Now, I'm not going to give you a definitive defend it to the death top 5 movies, but I'm going to make some suggestions for you to check out and enjoy the work of this great actor. One of his gifts, or maybe his chief gift, is that he was a profoundly charming man. He was like, if you took Matthew McConaughey and George Clooney and put them together, that's what you'd have. That's the level of charm. He is the original, of which those two are just copies. So let's get to this list. Let me start with Arsenic and Old Lace. This is an old comedy based on a play that had done quite well. It's directed by the inimitable Frank Capra and is quite silly. There's a sort of almost British romp kind of feel to it, and Cary Grant just does a wonderful, wonderful job in it. He plays Mortimer, and lots of big grins, lots of physical comedy, a lot of confusion, different circumstances. So check out Arsenic and Old Lace. That's one. Another one I'd like to commend to your watching is Charade. Charade is a chance to see Cary Grant acting with maybe the closest thing to his female counterpart. I mean, he's had some great leading ladies, but in this one, he is paired together with Audrey Hepburn in what is described as, not that these things normally go together, but a comedy thriller. In which, well, it's just a lot of fun. I would encourage you to check it out. Charade, and again, wonderful job by Audrey Hepburn, and probably enough to cause me to come back and consider a top 5 for Audrey Hepburn. To Catch a Thief is another one of those great movies. These last two, by the way, are in color. To Catch a Thief is another Hitchcock movie, and this one he plays opposite Grace Kelly. And it's just, I don't know how to describe it. As it's fun, it's an adventure, it is a look into a whole different lifestyle in the sort of French Riviera. So check that one out for sure. The Bishop's Wife. Now, that should be on your list too, but I will confess that the remake is somewhere close to almost as good, just as good, maybe a little better, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that is the version with Denzel Washington. And of course, Denzel is probably the greatest living actor right now. Suspicion. Oh, I love that one. Suspicion is another one where he is working together with Alfred Hitchcock, only there's no comic element to this. This is a story of a rakish, charming husband and a fearful heiress who just married Cary Grant, and now she's afraid that he's trying to kill her. And boy, it's not only one of the greatest Cary Grant movies, it's also one of the greatest Hitchcock movies. Now, I can't finish this without mentioning two other movies very quickly. One, An Affair to Remember, which also had a decent remake. I wouldn't say it's as good as the original, but this is one he stars with Deborah Kerr. And then lastly, North by Northwest, which is, some would argue, the greatest of the Hitchcock movies, or at least the greatest of the Hitchcock collaborations with Cary Grant. It's one of these stories built on the idea of mistaken identity and what comes out of that. North by Northwest. That one's also in color, by the way. So let me just encourage you to, go into, I don't know what kind of streaming services you might have, or if you pay to rent movies from places online or go out to the Red Box. I don't know how any of those things work anymore. I just know what I have. And we get a pretty decent dose of these kinds of movies that if we keep our eyes open, we take the opportunity to watch them. So check out Cary Grant. I mean, my stars, Cary Grant. And then one other thing I'd want you to check out is Goober Pyle, Gomer's cousin, doing his Cary Grant imitation. It is something to be seen. Why are unbelievers hostile toward the church? It is a common thing for Christians to side with non-Christians against other Christians. The reason for this is that we are sinners, Christians, non-Christians, and the other Christians. That is, Christian A listens with a sympathetic ear while non-Christian B recounts how he was terribly mistreated by Christians C. Christian A, you understand, could be sympathetic because he rightly feels bad about the mistreatment non-Christian B received. Or Christian A could be sympathetic simply because he wants non-Christian B to like him. And Christian C did nothing wrong at all. Sin, blame-shifting, and a craven hunger for approval are as commonplace as ABC. The point is that non-Christians get hostile against the church for all manner of illegitimate reasons. They accuse Christians of things they're not guilty of. They themselves feel guilty for things they are guilty of, but prefer to blame the Christians. Non-Christians also get hostile against the church for all manner of legitimate reasons. The church, after all, is full of sinners. Sinners sin. To assume that only one of these things could be true is to assume that only one group of people are capable of sin. That said, I suspect the best argument the non-Christian has against the Christian isn't that the Christian is too judgmental toward others, but that we are insufficiently judgmental toward ourselves. People, as a general rule, are reasonably comfortable having their sins pointed out, so long as we acknowledge the full depth and scope of our own sin. "You and I are miserable sinners" goes down much more easily than "You are a miserable sinner. I am good." More important and better still, "You and I are miserable sinners" is true, and "I am good" is not. There is, however, still another option. Sometimes I suspect that non-Christians have nothing but contempt for the church because we are so weak. Our hunger for their approval may just bring down on us their disapproval. No one admires a sniveler. When we insist that we never say a word that might offend them, we demonstrate to them that we fear them. They may rant and rail against us for the moral stances we take, but at the end of the day, caving in just makes it worse. Worse still, it offends the one we ought to be seeking to please. The solution? What if we were altogether eager to affirm both the sins of the non-Christians and the sins of the Christians, all while being careful to define sin as God does? What if we honestly and sincerely responded to that old complaint from outside our walls? The church is full of hypocrites with, "No, not true. It's not full. There's always room for one more." What if, instead of trying to decide whether to stand with the Christians or the non-Christians, we determined to kneel before Christ? What if we humbled ourselves not before them, but before Him? What if the church were that place where we competed to see who could be the most open, the most honest about our own failures, and then the most open and most honest about His provision? There is, friends, no good plan for those inside the church or those outside where we don't talk about sin. Never has been and never will be. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.